You know Achilles, right? The invincible Greek warrior played by Brad Pitt in Troy. The man who killed Hector, who made the Trojan army tremble. But the truth is, he was not as heroic as you think. He was an unstable demigod, ruled by ego, honor, and fury, capable of heroism and monstrosity at the same time. A man who had the choice to live a long and forgotten life, or die young and be remembered forever. And he chose death, with his eyes wide open, and in the end, he regretted it. Before Achilles was even born, his mother already knew. Thetis was a Nereid, a sea nymph, daughter of the god Nereus, immortal, and in love with a mortal named Peleus. The gods knew that the child of this union would be extraordinary. A prophecy said that Thetis' son would surpass his father in power. Zeus and Poseidon, who had both desired Thetis, gave up on her immediately when they learned this. Neither of them wanted a son more powerful than himself. So Thetis married Peleus, and Achilles was born. Thetis dipped her newborn son into the river Styx, the river of the underworld that granted invulnerability to anyone touched by its waters. She held him by the heel. His entire body was protected, except for the heel she was holding. But physical invulnerability was only half the story, because Thetis knew of another prophecy. Her son had two possible destinies. First, to live a long, peaceful, forgotten life in Phthia, marry, have children, grow old, and die like any other mortal. Second, to go to Troy, die young, and be remembered forever. It was no secret. It was not something Thetis hid from her son. Achilles grew up knowing. And when the Greeks began recruiting warriors for the Trojan War, Thetis tried to hide her son disguised as a woman in the court of King Lycomedes. It did not work. Odysseus found him, and Achilles went. Not because he was forced, because he chose to. A young man who knew he was going to die, and went anyway. Not out of ignorance, out of ambition. Certain death in exchange for eternal glory. The Greeks described Achilles as the fastest, the most beautiful, the deadliest in battle. Trained by the centaur Chiron from childhood, the same master who had taught Heracles, he commanded the Myrmidons, the most disciplined warriors in the Greek army. But there was a problem. Achilles was ruled by honor, the fragile honor of someone who built his entire identity on the recognition of others, and who completely collapses when that recognition is taken away from him in public. The Iliad begins with exactly that. Agamemnon, the supreme commander of the Greeks, took Briseis from Achilles, in front of everyone. Agamemnon was sending a clear message, deliberate, calculated, public. You may be the greatest warrior alive. I can still take what is yours, because I am the king. Achilles was furious. For a man like Achilles, public shame is not a feeling. It is a wound that does not close until the humiliation is answered. He refused to fight. Thousands of Greeks died on the battlefield without Achilles there. Agamemnon eventually returned Briseis with gifts and apologies. Achilles still did not return, because it was no longer about Briseis. It was about the principle. It was about honor. It was about ego. The Greeks who heard this story did not admire Achilles without reservation. They recognized his greatness, and they recognized his flaw. A man who lets an army die because his pride was wounded is not a hero. He is a danger. And then something happened that changed everything. Not a battle, a loss. Patroclus was Achilles' closest companion. The exact nature of their relationship has been debated by historians for centuries. The Greek texts are deliberately ambiguous. While Achilles remained in his tent, Patroclus watched the Greeks die, and he could not bear it. He went to Achilles with a request. If Achilles would not fight, then at least lend him the armor. Seeing Achilles' armor on the battlefield would raise Greek morale. Achilles agreed, on one condition. Patroclus would advance only so far, and then return. No unnecessary heroics. Patroclus went. He fought better than anyone expected. He went too far. Hector found him and killed him, believing he was killing Achilles. When the news reached the tent, Achilles screamed so loudly that Thetis heard him from the depths of the sea and rose to comfort him. What happened next was not grief. It was something more dangerous. The rage that had kept Achilles paralyzed for weeks finally found a direction. He no longer fought for glory. He fought to kill Hector. Only that. And when he found him, what he did next shocked even the gods. Achilles returned to the battlefield wearing new armor, forged by Hephaestus himself at Thetis' request. He destroyed everything in his path. The river Scamander overflowed with bodies. Hector knew what was coming. The other Trojans fled behind the city walls. Hector stayed outside. Priam, his father, his king, begged from the top of the walls for his son to come inside. Hecuba, his mother, begged too. Hector stayed. Hector fought. But Achilles, in that moment, was no longer human. He was the rage of a man who had lost the only person who mattered and had finally found the one responsible. He killed Hector, and then he did something even the gods considered dishonorable. He tied the body to the back of his chariot and dragged it around the walls of Troy, every day, for days, while Priam watched from above, while Hecuba watched, while all of Troy watched. The gods intervened. Zeus summoned Hermes, the messenger of the gods, the guide between worlds, the being who led souls between the living and the dead, and sent him to guide Priam. Priam left the city gates alone at night. He crossed the enemy lines unseen under Hermes' protection, entered the Greek camp, entered Achilles' tent, knelt before him, and kissed the hands of the man who had killed his son. He asked for Hector's body. Achilles looked at the old king at his feet, and something inside him broke. The two men wept together, Achilles for Patroclus, Priam for Hector. Achilles returned the body. He granted a truce for Hector's funeral, the warrior of fury, capable of compassion when least expected. But the prophecy had not forgotten him. The prophecy had said it from the beginning. Achilles would die at Troy, in battle, young, before the war was over. After Hector's death, Achilles kept fighting. He killed Memnon, the Ethiopian king. He killed Troilus, Priam's youngest son. He advanced alone toward the gates of Troy. Paris, the prince who had caused the entire war by abducting Helen, fired an arrow. On its own, it would never have reached far. But Apollo, who had protected Troy throughout the war, guided the arrow through the air, and it struck the only part of Achilles that Thetis had not dipped into the sticks, the heel. Achilles fell before the gates of Troy, with eternal glory already secured. It was exactly what he had chosen. But the story does not end there, because in the Odyssey, years later, Odysseus must descend into the underworld to consult the dead, and there he finds Achilles. Not the invincible warrior, not the most beautiful man in Greece, a shadow, a ghost barely able to hold the shape he once had. Odysseus tries to console him, speaking of fame, of glory, of how greatly his name is still celebrated among the living. And Achilles answers with something that contradicts everything his life had represented. He says he does not want to hear about glory, that he would rather be the humblest servant among the living, plowing the field of the poorest man in Greece, nameless, forgotten, unrecognized, than rule over all the dead, because glory belongs to the living who witness it, and Achilles was dead.